They told you never to go there, not because of trespassing signs, not because of fences or patrols, but because once you step into those woods, you are no longer the same man. This is not folklore, not campfire gossip. This is a wound in American soil, a scar so deep it bleeds into whoever touches it. Dudleytown. The name itself drips with silence. No welcome, no laughter of children, no trace of life. Only the ruins of a village swallowed whole. The air here does not sound like air. It is thick, dense, choked by something you cannot name. The kind of silence that should not exist in nature, the kind that presses into your ears until you wonder if you've gone deaf or if something has stolen sound itself. Locals whisper that when you cross into dark entry, the land begins to watch you. It feels like the trees lean closer, the shadows breathe, and the forest itself remembers your name. But this is not just a ghost story. It is not some harmless myth told to scare children. This is real history, buried under layers of denial and fear. The Dudley family did not stumble here by chance. They carried something across the ocean, something blacker than bad luck, something older than America itself. A curse, bound not by words, but by blood. And when their feet pressed into Connecticut soil, that curse did not follow. It rooted itself here, like a parasite in the earth. Dudleytown was never meant to grow. It was meant to rot, a place where crops withered, where minds fractured, where families devoured themselves in silence. The soil never fed anyone. It consumed them. Men wandered into the trees and never came back. Women screamed in the night. Children drowned in streams, too shallow to kill anyone, and neighbors whispered what everyone already knew. This was not coincidence. This was not failure or bad farming. This was the curse of the Dudleys, bleeding into the land and poisoning everything that touched it. The two, one lived, and then it died. In a way no town should, and yet it never left. The forest still holds it, like a mouth that refuses to close. And if you enter that mouth, if you step into the silence, you will feel what thousands before you felt. The pull, the weight, the suffocating truth that this place is not abandoned. It is waiting. The story begins long before the first cabin was ever raised in those hills, long before the American Revolution, long before Connecticut had its towns and borders. It begins in England, with a family name cursed by betrayal. The Dudleys. One ancestor was executed for treason, another stripped of lands, title, and power. Their bloodline fractured under the shadow of disgrace, and whispers spread, not of politics, but of punishment, that the family had been marked, that something dark clung to their name like a parasite when they fled across the Atlantic, seeking a new beginning in the new world. They did not escape it. They carried it with them, like a sickness hidden in the blood. And when they planted themselves in the forests of Cornwall, Connecticut, they planted the curse with them. The Dudleys built homes, carved farms from rock and shadow, raised a fragile community on the high ridges, a town that should have been nothing more than another colonial village. But from the beginning, there was a tension in the air, something unwelcoming, something that did not want them there. The soil was rocky, unforgiving. Crops struggled to grow. But it was more than poor farming. It was as if the land itself was rejecting them, spitting out their labor, turning their sweat to nothing. And then the deaths began. Not natural deaths, not the slow toll of age, but sudden, violent, inexplicable. Men fell into madness, women succumbed to despair, children vanished into shallow streams, or wandered into the woods, never to return. Neighbors whispered that the Dudleys had brought their curse across the sea, and the land was answering it. echoing their corruption back into flesh and soil. A community can withstand hunger. It can withstand hardship, but it cannot withstand madness, and Dudleytown became diseased with it. Fathers killed their families. Mothers hung themselves without reason. Sons vanished into the forest, like the trees had claimed them. And still the Dudleys remained at the center of it. The curse was not only upon their bloodline, it spread outward, like roots of poison threading through the hills. Every man who settled there, every woman who tried to build a life, every child who took a first breath in that place, became part of the pattern. And patterns are more dangerous than stories, because stories end, but patterns repeat, and in Dudleytown the pattern was death, madness, and silence. The silence that still holds the land today, the silence that does not forgive and does not forget. The curse did not strike once and vanish. It sank deeper with each generation. Each year another life fed it. Each season another family broke. At first it was whispered about in corners of candlelit rooms, but soon it became undeniable. Dudleytown was unraveling. A farmer hacked down his own kin in a frenzy of rage. No explanation, no quarrel, just sudden violence that left his neighbors staring into a house soaked with blood. Another man was found hanging in his barn, his face twisted in terror, as though he had not chosen death, but been driven into it. Children wandered to the edge of shallow brooks, streams barely deep enough to wet their ankles, and were found drowned, as if held down by hands unseen. The pattern became impossible to ignore, and the whispers sharpened into one name. Dudley, the family at the center of it all, the family that had carried ruin across the ocean, the family whose shadow touched every grave dug in those hills. It is said that one woman, Sarah Fay, began to see them before the end, shadows that watched her from the tree line, figures that spoke in voices no one else could hear. She tried to resist them, but the forest whispered too loudly until she took her own life to silence the voices. Her death was not the last. It was only a stone in an avalanche, because the curse did not need the living to sustain it. It needed their despair, their terror, their madness, and the woods were thick with it. By the late 1700s, Dudleytown was starving. The earth rejected crops. The animals thinned and sickened. But this was no ordinary famine. This was rot from within. The people still alive began to change, not only in their bodies, but in their eyes. Neighbors avoided one another. Whispers grew sharper. Paranoia spread like fire on dry leaves. It wasn't just that they were hungry. It was that they were hunted, not by wolves, not by bandits, but by their own thoughts. The land had infected them, and the worst part was not that they were dying. It was that they knew and could not stop it. The forest pressed in. The silence deepened, and Dudleytown began to collapse into itself. A town not conquered by outsiders, not destroyed by war, but consumed by its own soil. A village dying not of history, but of something older, something that still waits in the trees today. By the dawn of the 1800s, Dudleytown was already a ghost in all but name. Cabins stood hollow. Fields lay bare. The voices of children had gone silent, replaced by the low creak of wind through broken wood and the hush of trees reclaiming what man had dared to build. But not all left at once. A few families refused to abandon their homes, as if they believed defiance could shield them from what stalked the land. It could not. One man, Gershon Hollister, died in what neighbors called a mysterious accident. No one could explain it. No tool was broken. No witness saw a fall. He was simply gone. His body left twisted, as though the earth itself had claimed him. Sarah Fay remained, but her fate was worse. She began seeing what others pretended not to see, dark figures pacing the edges of the woods, shadows that moved even when no wind stirred the branches. She confessed to neighbors that the shadows whispered her name. over and over until her mind cracked beneath the pressure, and she ended her life by her own hand. Every death drove another family away, and each abandoned cabin became another wound in the land. Stone foundations stood like tombs, silent reminders of those who had tried to resist the curse and lost. The soil itself seemed to grow sharper. The crops starved, livestock sickened, and even the healthiest men and women felt the weight, as though the very air had grown heavy with disease. By the mid-1800s, Dudleytown was a shell, a place barely alive, and what little remained of community rotted into silence. Some say the land had claimed enough blood and let the rest go. Others believe it was only waiting for silence to deepen, so that it could feed in new ways. Because Dudleytown did not simply die. It transformed. The forest swallowed it whole. Roots split through the floors of abandoned homes. Vines climbed walls until no structure could be seen. The woods closed in like a curtain. Hidden. The stage where tragedy had played. But the silence was not emptiness. It was presence. Every man who left spoke of it. That heavy absence of sound. The way the forest seemed to breathe around you. As if every step you took echoed in the bones of something watching. By the late 1800s, there were no families left. No harvests. No children born in Dudleytown. Only ruins. And a silence that would never let go. When the last families abandoned Dudleytown, they thought the story was over. They believed the forest would erase what had been built, and in time, the memory would fade into nothing but rumor. But curses do not end when men walk away. They wait, and silence is a trap. It pulls the curious like a flame pulls the moth. By the late 1800s, the land was empty of settlers, but full of whispers. Travelers passing through Cornwall heard the stories of a town that had died in madness, of shadows that still lingered in the trees, of silence so heavy it could bend the mind, and they went looking for it. What they found was not a town, not even ruins in the way most places crumble. They found foundations buried beneath vines, stone walls half swallowed by roots, and an atmosphere that defied nature itself. The silence was the first thing they noticed, not ordinary silence, but an absence so complete it pressed into the skull. A silence that made your own heartbeat sound like thunder, that made your breath feel intrusive, as if even the act of existing had become too loud. And then came the presence. Visitors spoke of being watched, of feeling eyes on their backs as they wandered through the ruins. Some claimed to see shapes slipping between trees, figures darker than shadow, taller than men, always just out of reach. One man returned, saying he felt hands push against him, though no one stood behind him. Another swore. The forest whispered his name in the dark, and when he turned, the silence swallowed the sound before it reached his ears. Not everyone returned with stories. Some returned pale, shaking, unwilling to speak at all, as if naming what they saw would bring it closer, as if the silence had followed them home. The forest had consumed Dudleytown, but it had not sealed it away. It had transformed it into something else, something that called to the human hunger for forbidden places and punished that hunger. When it was indulged, every new set of footsteps added weight to the curse. Every trespasser carried a piece of silence back into the world. Dudleytown was no longer a village. It was an infection, a wound that spread through curiosity, and it is still spreading. By the 1900s, Dudleytown was gone. The cabins collapsed, the fields erased, the forest swallowed everything whole. But myths don't die with wood and stone. They call men back to them. Hunters came first, then hikers, then thrill-seekers chasing the whispers of a cursed village. They stepped past the tree line of dark entry, expecting quiet woods. Instead, they found silence that was wrong, No birds, no insects, no wind through the leaves, only a suffocating stillness, so heavy it pressed against the skull, so sharp it made every heartbeat sound like thunder. And in that silence, the mind began to fracture. Some saw shadows on the ridges, figures too tall, too narrow to be human. Others felt hands on their shoulders, but turned to find nothing. Compasses spun out of control. Cameras refused to work. Footsteps echoed where no ground existed, as if the land itself was rearranging the rules of nature. One man clawed his arms until they bled, screaming that voices demanded an offering to the soil. Another staggered out days later, eyes empty, unable to say his own name, but the worst were the ones who walked away intact, because Dudleytown went with them, into their homes, into their sleep, into the silence of their own thoughts. It does not need belief, it only needs you to stand inside it once, and it will follow you forever. That is why, by the mid-20th century, the land was sealed, fences raised, signs hammered into trees, patrols circling the ruins. The Dark Entry Forest Association claimed it was conservation, but ask yourself this: why guard a dead village so fiercely? Why protect silence so desperately? Because the silence is not absence, it is presence, and it does not want to be disturbed. The fences went up, the gates were locked, and suddenly Dudleytown was no longer abandoned land. It was protected land, protected by the Dark Entry Forest Association. On paper, they claimed to preserve the forest, to keep hikers safe from rugged terrain, to shield fragile ruins from vandals. But the question no one dares to ask is this: who were they really protecting? The people, from Dudleytown, or Dudleytown? From the people, because secrecy always hides intention, and this secrecy was absolute. Signs screamed, no trespassing, patrols warned of prosecution, even photographs were forbidden. Why such obsession over a pile of stone foundations? Why such desperate control over silence? Some believe the association knew that the land was poisoned, not by chemicals, but by something older, something spiritual. That if too many people saw it, if too many men stepped into that silence, the infection would spread beyond the forest. And so Dudleytown became a paradox, locked away, yet hungering, hidden, yet still calling those reckless enough to climb fences in the dead of night. And when they did, the silence greeted them, the same suffocating stillness, the same pressure on the chest, the same presence lingering at the edge of vision. Some teenagers returned pale, unwilling to speak of what they saw. Others fled screaming, eyes wide with the faces they swore were staring from the trees. Police were called often. Reports of fires glowing at midnight, of chanting in the woods, of gunshots echoing across Dark Entry. But when officers arrived, nothing was there. No fires, no footprints, no bodies, only the silence. And the certainty that something had been watching them. Even the law could not touch Dudleytown, because what lives in that forest is not bound by law. It is bound by silence, by secrecy, by the curse itself. And that curse does not care for fences. It waits. As the decades passed, Dudleytown was not forgotten. It was hunted, not by settlers, not by farmers, but by the ones drawn to silence. The thrill seekers became something darker. Groups sneaking through the fences at night, moving in circles with flashlights, carrying symbols carved into wood, carrying knives. Locals whispered about rituals, strange gatherings in the ruins of old cabins, candles lit where families once wept, blood spilled into the earth that had already taken too much, and always. The chanting, witnesses swore they heard voices rising from the forest after midnight, low, rhythmic tones, not English, not anything human, a sound that clung to the trees and carried on the wind. Even when the wind itself was still, police were called again and again. But by the time they arrived, the ruins were empty. Only the smolder of candle wax in the dirt, only the markings of strange symbols in the soil. Some claimed it was teenagers playing at witchcraft. Others insisted it was organized, that secret societies had taken Dudleytown as their altar, that the silence was not just a curse, it was a door. and these people were trying to open it wider. There were reports of gutted animals left on the stones, of photographs burned in shallow pits, of names scratched into tree bark that later matched missing persons, but no proof ever held. The association buried every story, every article, every trace that threatened to break the silence. And so Dudleytown's reputation grew darker. It was no longer just the village of the damned, it became the village of the forbidden, a place where men came not only to defy fear, but to worship it, because some didn't run from the curse. They embraced it, believing the silence itself could grant them power, if they fed it enough suffering. And in that forest, no one was watching to stop them, except the silence itself. Every legend has believers. But Dudleytown did more than draw believers. It swallowed them. Men came chasing whispers of power, of secret knowledge, of gateways hidden in the silence. Some never returned. The record is thin, because the association smothered every headline, but stories bled through in whispers, in missing person reports that led nowhere, in families who swore their sons went camping and never came home. One such story tells of a group of young men from New York in the 1970s. They laughed at the curse. They carried beer and flashlights into the ruins, boasting they would spend the whole night in Dudleytown at dawn. Only one of them staggered out of the forest, barefoot, eyes vacant, muttering a single phrase over and over again. They weren't ours. They weren't ours. When police questioned him, he could not describe what happened. He could not even say his own name, and when officers went searching for his friends, there were no bodies, no footprints, no evidence they had ever been there. Another account tells of a man who went alone, an amateur paranormal investigator with a tape recorder in hand. The device was found days later at the edge of dark entry, covered in mud. The tape inside contained 2 minutes of static, followed by a single sound, a deep inhalation, as though something huge was breathing directly into the microphone. The man himself was never found. And then there are those who did return, but not whole. One woman, after trespassing in the 1980s, began waking at night to scratching sounds inside her walls. She told friends the silence of Dudleytown had followed her home, that it stood at the foot of her bed, waiting, watching, measuring her breath with its own. Within weeks, she stopped sleeping altogether. Her journals, later found by family, were filled with a single sentence written hundreds of times. The silence is not empty. She was institutionalized shortly after. This is the pattern. Dudleytown does not always kill. Sometimes it lets you walk away because it knows you'll carry it inside you, and that is far more dangerous than death. The curse of Dudleytown does not end at its borders. It follows. Not with footsteps, not with shadows, but with silence. Those who return often carry something back with them, an infection that is not seen on the skin, but felt in the mind. It begins small, the faint sense of being watched, the urge to glance over your shoulder in empty rooms, the sudden silence in a house that should be alive with sound. Then it grows. Sleep becomes fragile, dreams too vivid, filled with faces that do not belong to memory, figures standing at the edge of the bed, always too tall, always too thin. Some describe waking to find the silence pressing down on their chest, as though the forest itself had laid its weight upon them. Others hear whispers in the dead of night, not voices they can understand, just fragments. Breaths too close to the ear. One man confessed that he began hearing his own name, spoken softly from the dark corners of his home. He searched the house again and again, but the voice always followed, until he could no longer tell if he was awake or still inside Dudleytown. Another victim found every mirror in his house fogging, even in summer heat. When he wiped them clear, he swore he saw shapes standing behind him, shapes that disappeared before the glass dried. These hauntings were not tied to place. They were tied to the person. The silence had chosen them, marked them, and once marked, there was no escape. Because Dudleytown does not simply exist in Connecticut. It exists in memory, in dream, in the hollow corners of the mind where fear lives. You cannot cleanse it. You cannot outrun it. It is a parasite of thought, feeding every time you recall it, every time you speak of it, every time you wonder whether the silence is listening. And maybe it is. Skeptics will tell you, there is no curse, no shadows in the trees, no voices in the silence. They point to science, to psychology, to geology, and yet even their explanations feel like whispers of the same darkness, dressed in lab coats instead of superstition. They say Dudleytown's madness was isolation, families trapped in stone-choked soil, breathing the same silence year after year, until the mind began to fracture under the weight of its own echo. Others speak of magnetism, of invisible frequencies seeping from the rocks, warping thought, bending vision, making men see figures that are not there, and feel touches in the air that should be empty. Experiments have been run. Men placed in sealed rooms, exposed to subtle electromagnetic fields, and within minutes, they swore something stood beside them, watching, breathing. A phantom born, not of death, but of science. Then there is the bloodline itself, the Dudleys, carriers of ruin. A family shadowed by treason and downfall before they ever set foot in America. Perhaps their curse was genetic, threads of madness woven into their DNA, handed down like an inheritance, generation after generation, until every branch bent under the same weight. These are rational explanations. They soothe the surface. They make the curse sound containable, manageable. But here is the problem. Even those who never heard the legends, even those who walked into the woods with no belief, no expectation, reported the same silence, the same pressure, the same watching presence. How does the mind invent terror? It does not know to expect. How does science explain a curse that speaks before the story is told? Dudleytown resists both logic and legend. It feeds on both. It thrives in the overlap between superstition and science, between the curse of blood and the distortion of the earth itself. And that overlap, that hidden architecture, is where control hides, because a place that bends both mind and spirit does not simply haunt you, it owns you forever. Silence is not emptiness, it is a weapon. And Dudleytown was silenced on purpose. Think about it. A cursed village, an entire community driven to madness, collapsed into ruin. Yet where is it in the history books? Where are the records taught in schools? Where are the documents you should have been able to read? Gone, erased, covered in vines and official indifference. That silence is not natural, it is manufactured. By the late 1800s, Dudleytown had become more than a failed settlement. It was a wound, a scar too ugly for America's shining image of progress. So the story was buried, the archives sealed, the memory left to rot in the forest. But not everything stays buried, because if you search, if you pry into old ledgers and letters, you find hints, reports of suicides with no cause, families vanishing without explanation, local officials calling the place unfit for habitation and quietly marking it for erasure. Why would they hide a simple tragedy? unless it was more than tragedy. The 1900s brought something stranger. The land fell into the hands of the Dark Entry Forest Association, a group that locked the ruins away. No trespassing signs hammered into trees, threats of prosecution for anyone who entered. Why guard a dead village so fiercely? Why keep people out of stones and shadows? Unless there was something still alive in that silence. This is where history folds into secrecy. The curse became convenient. Let people whisper about ghosts and madness, and they won't ask what is really being hidden. Because legends distract, they misdirect, and the truth remains untouched beneath the noise. Dudleytown is more than folklore. It is a redacted page in America's history, a place where the line between haunting and control blurs. And the deeper you go into that silence, the more you feel it was never about ghosts at all. It was about power, and power never leaves ruins behind without reason. There are whispers that Dudleytown was not just abandoned, but used. That once the last families left, once the houses collapsed into moss and stone, the silence became useful. Think about it. A place sealed by fear, avoided by locals, guarded by nature itself. What better stage for experiments that could never survive the light? Because history shows us something clear. The 19th and 20th centuries were not innocent. Governments and institutions used the forgotten, the broken, the erased as testing grounds. Sanitariums where children were fed radioactive cereal. Prisons where men were subjected to chemical hallucinations. Hospitals where the insane were lobotomized without consent. And always, the justification was the same: progress, knowledge, control now. Place those shadows over Dudleytown, a village already marked by madness, already cursed in reputation. If screams echoed in the forest, if strange lights burned through the trees at night, who would believe it was science? Who would question beyond the story of ghosts? Some locals swore they saw fires glowing at midnight, chants rolling across the hills. Not the voices of witches, but gatherings with order, with precision, as if ritual masked something more systematic. And still, the Dark Entry Forest Association guarded the land, not to protect hikers from superstition, but to protect something else from discovery. It makes sense, doesn't it? The best place to hide the truth is inside a legend so terrifying no one dares get close. And Dudleytown is the perfect camouflage, because every time someone reports strange lights or whispers of figures moving in the ruins, the story collapses into just another ghost tale. That is how control works, not by erasing the story, but by feeding it just enough myth, so no one dares to see what lies beneath. The deeper you follow the silence, the clearer it becomes. Dudleytown may not simply be cursed land. It may have been a laboratory of shadows, where madness was harvested, where silence was engineered, where truth was buried beneath folklore. And if that is true, then every ghost story you've heard about Dudleytown was never about the dead. It was about the living and what they chose to do in the dark. Every cursed place hides ritual, and Dudleytown is no exception. The locals spoke of witches, of gatherings in the forest, of shadows moving with torches after midnight. But you must understand, witchcraft is the language people use when they glimpse ritual they cannot name. When they see precision where there should be chaos, order where there should only be ruin. What if those gatherings were not superstition, but structure, not random chanting, but coordinated invocation? Because the soil of Dudleytown was heavy with something, tragedy layered over tragedy, suicides and madness etched into the earth like scars. That kind of land does not simply rest. It absorbs. It remembers. It holds charge like a battery of pain. And in the hands of those who understand ritual, pain becomes power. Look carefully at the reports. Symbols carved into old stone foundations, patterns not natural to decay, but deliberate, placed with intent, markings designed to trap, to focus, to amplify. Some explorers swore they saw circles burned into the earth. Not campfires, but geometric, mathematical, the kind of designs meant to open doors rather than warm hands. And when the chants were heard at night, they were not wild. They were measured, rhythmic, engineered for effect. The forest itself became an altar. The ruins became sigils. The silence became the vessel for invocation. What was being summoned, what was being fed, remains uncertain. But here is the truth men rarely want to face. Ritual is not about belief. It is about effect. It does not matter if the participants think it is superstition or science. If the land itself responds, if the silence bends, then something is being harnessed. And Dudleytown, with its centuries of blood and madness, was the perfect conduit. So the question you must ask yourself is simple. Were these rituals designed to banish the curse, or to feed it? Because the answer determines whether Dudleytown was a tragedy or a deliberate engine of power, disguised as a ghost story. What if Dudleytown was not an accident, not a village cursed by chance, but a place chosen, cultivated, guarded? Look at the pattern. The Dudley family brought a curse with them from England, a legacy of treason and downfall. They settled here in the Connecticut hills. Of all the fertile valleys, of all the safe and open fields, they chose a high, rocky ridge smothered in shadow. Why? Because land like this does not call to farmers. It calls to something else. What if they were led here, guided by knowledge whispered across bloodlines, a family not just marked by tragedy, but used as vessels, anchors for something older than America itself? And when the soil rejected their crops, when madness rose in their homes, when suicides spread like contagion, it was not failure, it was offering. The land drank their ruin. It grew stronger with every broken life, every violent act, every scream swallowed by the trees. And then, when the last families left, the land was not abandoned. It was sealed. The Dark Entry Forest Association took control, a group with money, with influence, with determination strong enough to keep everyone out. Why guard a dead village so obsessively? Why chase away hikers and hunters? Why threaten trespassers with the law? Unless the land was not dead at all. Unless it was a resource, a machine that needed protection, not from vandalism, but from discovery. Because if a place can feed on pain, if it can bend minds, if it can twist silence into madness, then that place is not just cursed, it is valuable to those who trade in power, to those who worship in secrecy, to those who understand that fear is the purest currency. Dudleytown was not a failure of settlement. It was a success of design, an altar disguised as a ghost story, a ritual ground wrapped in myth, a machine humming in the shadows of Connecticut's forest. And you were never meant to see it this way, because once you do, you cannot go back. You begin to understand why the silence is guarded, why the legends are encouraged, why the truth is nowhere in your history books. Because Dudleytown was never a village of the damned, it was a village of the chosen. If Dudleytown was chosen, if it was cultivated into something more than a village, then the silence surrounding it was no longer just folklore. It was strategy. Because silence is a tool of control, think of it this way. What better weapon than a place that erases reason, a place that bends the mind, a place where the air itself whispers violence into your thoughts? That kind of environment is not simply dangerous, it is useful. Psychological control systems do not need chains or whips. They need uncertainty. They need fear that corrodes the mind from within. Fear without source, without explanation. Fear that feels eternal. Dudleytown provides exactly that. Step inside the boundary. The silence drops. The birds vanish, the wind dies, and the human brain, built to process sound, begins to break without it. This is not superstition. This is neurology. The brain, under sensory deprivation, fractures, hallucinates, turns against itself. Now imagine combining that with a land already soaked in tragedy, already vibrating with stories of madness and death. The silence becomes heavier. The pressure becomes unbearable, and the mind collapses. Was this accidental, or was it engineered? Because in the 20th century, when experiments in mind control were quietly spreading through institutions and laboratories, Dudleytown stood locked and guarded, the perfect closed system, the perfect test site. Locals reported lights at night, chants echoing through the trees, whispers of gatherings that felt more like trials than rituals. Could this have been ritual alone, or was it ritual fused with science, testing how far silence and suggestion could bend a human soul? The more you see it, the clearer the pattern becomes. Dudleytown was not erased because it was irrelevant. It was erased because it was active, a weapon disguised as a legend, a psychological machine hidden in plain sight. And those who owned the land, those who silenced the story, were not protecting the people from a curse. They were protecting the curse from the people. Because when you control silence, when you control fear, you do not just control a village, you control men, you control memory, you control the future. The curse of Dudleytown did not stay behind the stone walls and rotting foundations. It bled outward, like roots spreading through the soil, reaching far beyond the forest. You see it in the stories of those who never lived inside the village, but lived near it, or dared to touch its borders. A doctor who built his home on the outskirts watched his wife unravel into madness. She whispered of something stalking her. Not a man, not an animal, but a shadow that crept into her soul. Within months, she was gone. A farmer who wandered too close, vanished without trace. His tools were found in the dirt, as if he had simply been swallowed by the ground. A traveler resting near the ruins reported visions that followed him for years. Faces of the dead hovering in his dreams, voices calling his name in the night, until he finally took his own life. This is the nature of Dudleytown's curse. It does not stay in one place. It follows, it attaches, like a parasite that moves from soil to blood to mind. Some locals began calling the land around it Dark Entry. The name was no accident. Even in daylight, the forest was unnaturally dim. Shadows clung to the trees, and the silence pressed in like a weight on the chest. Hunters refused to enter. Children were warned away. Even birds seemed to abandon it, because Dudleytown is not just ruins, it is a threshold. And once you cross it, something crosses into you. That is why so many who left never truly escaped. The madness traveled with them. The silence whispered through their lives. They carried it like an infection no doctor could name. It is not superstition to say the land is alive. It is not imagination to say it follows. This is what curses do. They expand. They root themselves deeper. They grow stronger the more they are denied. And Dudleytown's silence, its curse, its presence, has been stretching outward for centuries. Which means, if you are listening now, if you are following these words deeper and deeper into the story, you are already at its edge. By the 20th century, Dudleytown was no longer just a forgotten ruin. It had become a beacon, not for settlers, not for farmers, but for those who hunt the forbidden, those who seek power in the cracks of the world, Where others fear to look, the stories of shadows and silence were not enough to keep everyone away. They drew the curious, the desperate, the ambitious. Some came for thrill, to test themselves against the curse. Teenagers breaking through fences, ghost hunters dragging cameras into the dark, explorers sleeping on stone foundations to prove their courage. But others came with purpose, with knowledge. Reports began to circulate of strange gatherings deep in the forest. Flickers of fire moving among the ruins, symbols carved into stone, whispers of chants carried on the wind, not random superstition, but ritual with precision, design with intent, because those who understood the weight of Dudleytown knew the truth. This was not a place to be feared, it was a place to be used. Pain is power, silence is power, and Dudleytown offered both in abundance. Some say occultists gathered here, drawn by centuries of tragedy soaked into the ground. Others insist secret societies used it as a private stage, where the myth of the curse provided perfect cover. If anyone heard screams in the night, if anyone saw lights flickering through the trees, they dismissed it as ghosts, legends, superstition. That is the camouflage of power, to let the fearful tell your story for you, so the truth never has to surface. And still, the Dark Entry Forest Association kept its grip. No trespassing, no photographs, no explanations. What kind of land needs guardians like that? What kind of ruin demands secrecy for more than 100 years? This was no simple forest. This was no forgotten village. Dudleytown had become an altar of the forbidden, a magnet for those who feed on what most men cannot face, a sanctuary for rituals that thrive in silence, and a cage designed to keep the uninitiated out. But remember this: when power gathers in secret, it does not stay contained forever. It leaks, it spreads, it seeks new vessels. And if Dudleytown has been fed for centuries, the question is not whether it is alive. The question is, what is it becoming? By the time the modern age arrived, Dudleytown had become more than a place of whispers. It was a challenge, a dare, a forbidden gate, and the ones who crossed into it were no longer farmers or settlers. They were seekers, hunters of thrill, students of the occult, and wanderers who believed the curse was not a warning, but an invitation. Yet the forest did not welcome them. It devoured them. Stories poured out of the 20th century like fractures in the silence. A group of explorers entered the woods one summer. By morning, one of them was missing. The others stumbled out at dawn, silent, shaking, unable to explain what happened. The missing man was never found. A pair of ghost hunters camped inside the ruins with cameras rolling. What the footage revealed was worse than shadows. Hours of silence, blank frames, and then screams not captured in the air around them, but inside the microphones, as if the forest had spoken through the machines themselves. Neither hunter ever returned to the site. Even hikers who brushed the edge of Dudleytown told of sudden sickness, disorientation, hallucinations of figures standing between the trees, as though the forest itself rejected them, or worse, tested them, because Dudleytown had grown teeth. What was once a silent ruin was now a predator. It fed on fear, on intrusion, on the arrogance of those who thought they could stand against it, and each new story became another brick in its mythology, another layer of protection, because when fear spreads through rumor, fewer dare to test the truth. Yet still, the Dark Entry Forest Association kept the gates locked. Still, the ruins were guarded. Still, the silence was protected. If this was just a story, just a myth, why defend it with such ferocity? Why patrol land that was supposedly dead. Why punish trespassers like criminals? Because maybe Dudleytown was not a ruin at all. Maybe it was an experiment, still running, still gay. Thereing data, still feeding. The seekers who vanished were not victims of chance. They were offerings, and the forest, patient and ancient, kept growing stronger. By the late 20th century, Dudleytown was no longer simply abandoned land. It was sealed. The Dark Entry Forest Association, a private organization with quiet money and powerful influence, took full control. They erected gates, posted guards, patrolled the woods, and declared the ruins off-limits to the public. On paper, their mission was preservation, to protect the land from vandals, to guard the forest from careless explorers. But preservation does not demand silence. Protection does not require secrecy. This was more than protection. This was erasure. The association made sure no photographs of the ruins survived. They chased away historians. They buried legal records. And they scrubbed any trace of Dudleytown from maps and tourist guides, as if the village itself had never existed. Why such ferocity? Why the need to erase not just the present, but the past? Because Dudleytown is not just cursed soil. It is dangerous knowledge. Every ruined foundation, every blood-soaked story, every whispered tragedy is a piece of a puzzle that certain hands cannot allow to be solved. If this were merely folklore, why not let it rot into ghost stories? Why not let the curious wander through and find nothing? Instead, anyone who dares to step inside is branded a trespasser, dragged before courts, fined, silenced. And the silence is the most telling detail of all. The association does not release statements. They do not debate. They do not explain. They do not need to, because silence protects them. The same way silence has always protected Dudleytown. It is the weapon, the shroud, the lock. And in that silence, questions multiply. Who funds the Dark Entry Forest Association? Why is the land still guarded after more than a century? What do they fear people will find among the stones and shadows? The ruins are not the danger. The knowledge is. Because if Dudleytown is an altar, if Dudleytown is a machine, if Dudleytown is still feeding, then sealing it away is not protection for the public. It is protection for the secret itself. And secrets this heavily guarded are never harmless. Dudleytown is not alone. Once you recognize the pattern, you see it everywhere. Silent towns, erased villages, forests sealed by private hands, land that once thrived with life, suddenly reduced to ruins, then locked away with chains of secrecy. Look to Centralia, Pennsylvania, a town emptied after the coal fire that still burns beneath it, declared unlivable, declared lost, but fenced and guarded, as if something more than fire still smolders below. Look to North Brother Island in New York, once a quarantine site, then abandoned, now patrolled and forbidden to all visitors, a place where disease was the excuse, but secrecy was the law. Look to the desert lands used by the government in Nevada. Testing grounds, they called them. But the erasure of towns and people, the silence imposed over what truly happened there, follows the same design. Erasure, secrecy, control. Dudleytown fits perfectly into this hidden architecture, a lattice of forbidden places, sites soaked in tragedy, sealed not because of danger, but because of potential, potential for power, potential for exposure, potential for truths that would unravel the official story. And always, always, the same tactics. Guardians who claim to protect the land, but never explain. Boundaries enforced with threats and punishment. History rewritten or erased entirely. The pattern is not coincidence. It is design. Dudleytown is a piece of a larger map, a network of silence spread across America. Each location another node, another altar, another machine humming in the dark. And if the same hand has touched them all, then the curse of Dudleytown is not local, not confined to Connecticut soil. It is systemic. It is national, perhaps even global. The silence is not just around the village, it is around us. And once you see it, once you feel the weight of it pressing in from all sides, you understand. Dudleytown is not just history. It is a blueprint, and the blueprint was never meant for you to read. Fear is the oldest currency of control, and erased places like Dudleytown are vaults where that currency is minted. Think of what a curse does to the human mind. It plants uncertainty. It breeds paranoia. It makes men destroy themselves without a hand ever being laid upon them. That is power. The rulers of old empires understood it. The priests of ancient cults perfected it, and modern institutions have refined it to a science. Dudleytown is a case study in that science. You take land, you load it with tragedy, you bury it in silence, you let rumors of curses and madness do the rest. No chains, no prisons, no armies required. The people police themselves. Fear becomes self-sustaining. Every whisper of insanity, every disappearance, every suicide only strengthens the legend, and the legend strengthens the control. This is psychological warfare at its purest, a system where the battlefield is not the soil beneath your feet, but the corridors of your own mind. And if Dudleytown was cultivated, if it was designed to function as a psychological weapon, then it means more than one thing. It means silence is not absence. It is presence. It is pressure. It is command. It means the tragedies that unfolded there were not random, but ingredients. Every death, every scream, every vanishing a sacrifice laid at the altar of control. And it means the Dark Entry Forest Association are not just caretakers of land, they are wardens of fear, guardians of a weapon that still hums quietly in the ruins, because fear locked away does not die. It ferments, it grows stronger, it waits for the next time it will be poured into the minds of men. And once you understand that, once you see fear as something cultivated, something engineered, something traded like a currency, you begin to realize Dudleytown is not haunted by ghosts of the past. It is haunted by the future of control, a future built not on armies, but on silence. No, on chains, but on whispers, a future where the curse is no longer confined to a forest, but becomes the air we all breathe. The curse of Dudleytown does not end at its borders. It follows those who dare to cross the threshold. It attaches itself like a parasite, and it feeds long after the soil has been left behind. This is where the story sharpens. Not into legend, but into testimony. Men and women who entered the ruins returned altered, carrying fragments of silence inside them. One hiker was found staggering along a country road at dawn, his clothes torn, his hands bleeding. He claimed voices in the forest told him to pay the debt. When asked what debt, he simply wept and never spoke again. A young woman who camped near the stone foundations of an old cabin returned home with eyes vacant. She told her family she had seen her own reflection standing in the trees, smiling at her in the dark. She would not step near a mirror after that night. And she died within the year. Even children have felt its reach. Local lore tells of two boys in the 1970s who vanished after sneaking into Dark Entry. Their bicycles were found at the edge of the trail, but no trace of them was ever seen again. The police called it a runaway case. The locals called it the curse feeding. And then there are the wanderers, men discovered miles from Dudleytown, shoeless, muttering nonsense, their memories fractured, their identities erased. The land does not just haunt, it extracts. It takes pieces of sanity, shreds of identity, fragments of memory, and leaves the victim hollow. This is the most terrifying truth, because it reveals the curse for what it really is. Not some vengeful spirit chasing people through the woods, but a system that reaches into your mind, disrupts it, scrambles it, and leaves you permanently marked. It is the same method used in ancient rites, in secret initiations, in psychological experiments hidden behind locked doors. Dudleytown is not just a ruin. It is an initiation ground, a place that chooses who walks away whole and who becomes a vessel of silence. Those who leave are never the same. They carry the infection into their homes, into their families, into their dreams, and sometimes the curse does not wait for them to return to the forest. It comes to them instead, because once the silence knows your name, it does not forget. What if Dudleytown is not just a forgotten village, but a laboratory? Not for science as you know it, but for something older, darker, a study in how far the human mind can be bent before it breaks. Think of it, an isolated community, a family line already soaked in whispers of treason and betrayal, placed in unforgiving land, cut off from the world. It is the perfect test site, and what happened there follows a pattern too exact to ignore. The suicides, the madness, the vanishings, they echo the methods used centuries later in psychological warfare programs. MK Ultra, sensory deprivation, environmental manipulation. But Dudleytown predates those programs by centuries, which raises a question. Was it an accident of cursed bloodlines and bad land, or was it cultivated, planned, a petri dish of human despair? The silence of Dudleytown is not natural. It behaves like an engineered condition. No birds, no wind, no insects, just pressure, just weight, like a deprivation chamber, where your own thoughts turn against you. And then there is the secrecy. The Dark Entry Forest Association didn't just purchase the land, they locked it down. No trespassing signs hammered into trees, no cameras, no photographs, no questions answered. Why guard ruins so obsessively? The official explanation is safety. The truth feels closer to containment, because the curse is contagious. It leaks into those who visit. It follows them home. And if enough men stumble into it, if enough testimonies surface, the pattern becomes undeniable. And the pattern is the weapon. A land that teaches fear, a silence that breaks minds, a curse that spreads without being seen. This is why institutions bury certain places in silence, not because they are useless, but because they are too useful. You don't dismantle a weapon like that. You store it, you guard it, you wait until it is needed again. Dudleytown may appear abandoned, but in reality, it is archive, a living relic of psychological warfare, locked in the woods of Connecticut, still humming with the experiments of centuries past. And if you can see that, you begin to realize the curse was never about the Dudleys. It was about us. Fear is the purest weapon ever forged. It requires no armies, no steel, no bullets, only whispers, only silence, only the imagination tearing itself apart in the dark. Dudleytown proves this. A village erased from maps, a ruin swallowed by trees, and yet, centuries later, its silence still commands respect, still bends men to terror, still keeps entire communities away. That is power. And when you study Dudleytown closely, you see its blueprint reflected in the world around you. The soil there poisoned minds. But what if the soil was only the medium? What if the real experiment was learning how to seed a curse, how to plant fear so deeply that it outlives generations? Governments have mastered this art. They do not need ghosts in the trees. They conjure their own specters, invisible enemies, unseen threats, shadows too vague to prove, but too terrifying to ignore. They tell you where not to go, what not to think, what not to question, and like Dudleytown, the fear polices itself. People whisper warnings to one another. Legends spread. Obedience grows without chains or prisons. Think of the Cold War. Invisible bombs that could fall at any second. Think of the war on terror. An unseen enemy that could be anywhere. Think of pandemics, where fear itself becomes the disease that spreads faster than any virus. It is the same system, the same architecture of silence and dread, and Dudleytown is its prototype. A village that taught rulers and institutions one devastating truth. You do not need to conquer men with weapons. You only need to convince them the shadows will do it for you. That is why Dudleytown remains locked away, not because of ghosts, but because of what it represents. The raw formula of control. Silence as pressure, fear as law, madness as contagion. This is not folklore. This is a manual, and once you see it, once you hear it, you can never unsee it again. The curse is not just history buried in the Connecticut woods. It is the same curse we live under today. The only difference, now it has been perfected. Do you really think the curse of Dudleytown stayed in the trees? Do you think silence this powerful, darkness this patient, would ever remain chained to a single ruin in the Connecticut hills? No. It spreads. Not through soil, not through stone, but through patterns, through psychology, through systems built to keep you obedient without a single hand touching you. Look closely at your own life. The places you are told not to go, the questions you are told not to ask, the histories erased from your school books, the stories whispered but never written. That is Dudleytown, echoing in plain sight when your thoughts are narrowed by fear of punishment, when your actions are steered by invisible boundaries, when silence itself dictates your choices. You are walking the same path the villagers walked centuries ago. They built their homes on cursed land. You build your mind on cursed beliefs. The ruins you see in Dudleytown. Stone walls crumbling under moss and shadow, are not different from the ruins inside modern men. Identities cracked under pressure. Spirits collapsed under the weight of unseen control. And here is the most brutal truth. Most men never escape it. They live their entire lives as if the curse is natural, as if the silence is simply how things are, as if their fear is proof of safety rather than evidence of control. But you are listening now. You are seeing the pattern. You are realizing that Dudleytown was never about ghosts. It was a training ground, an initiation into the reality that fear can be engineered, curses can be cultivated, and entire populations can be bent into obedience without ever knowing the name of their jailer. This is the knowledge they do not want you to have, the knowledge sealed behind fences, hidden in ruins, guarded by silence, because once a man sees it, he cannot go back. He cannot unlearn it. He cannot live the same way again. The curse of Dudleytown is not in the forest anymore. It is in you now. The only question is, will you let it consume you, or will you use it as the key to break every invisible chain they have placed on your life? Every descent has a point of no return. For Dudleytown, it was the day the last family abandoned their home, leaving the village to rot beneath the trees. For you, it is right now, because you have followed me through the ruins. You have walked the corridors of silence. You have seen how curses are not just superstition, but architecture, a system of control designed to bend men without chains. And once you see that, once you recognize the pattern, you cannot step back into ignorance. That is the real curse. Not madness, not suicide, not shadows whispering in the trees. The curse is awareness, the burden of knowledge that the world around you is not random, it is cultivated. Your fears are fed, your silence is purchased, your obedience is engineered. Dudleytown is the mirror they never wanted you to face, because in its reflection, you see your own life stripped bare. The gates you obey without question, the histories you were never taught, the rules you live under without knowing who wrote them. And here is where the transformation happens. You can walk away. Pretend this was just a story. Dismiss it as another ghost tale whispered in the dark, or you can carry the truth forward, the knowledge that fear is not natural, it is planted. The knowledge that silence is not empty, it is full of command. The knowledge that curses are not chains on the dead, they are shackles on the living. This is the moment where Dudleytown reaches out of the past and places its hand on your shoulder, whispering the same question it has whispered for centuries. Will you run like the villagers did? Or will you stand in the silence and master it? Because every man who masters fear, every man who refuses to bow to the engineered curse, becomes something the system cannot control. A man who sees, a man who decides, a man who breaks the pattern. And that is the kind of man Dudleytown was never meant to create. The forest waits. It has waited for centuries, for the footsteps of the curious, for the minds that wander too deep, for the souls bold enough or foolish enough to trespass past its gates. Dudleytown is not gone. It is not abandoned. It is not history. It is alive, breathing through roots, whispering through silence, feeding on every man who dares to look too closely. And tonight, you have looked too closely. You have seen the bloodline curse, the pattern of engineered fear, the blueprint of control, the silence that is not absence but command. You cannot erase what you have heard. You cannot unsee what has been placed before you. That is why Dudleytown endures. Because it is more than a ruin in Connecticut. It is a living symbol of the invisible systems that bind men every single day. It is proof that fear is not random. It is cultivated. It is weaponized. It is passed down like a ritual, like a dark inheritance. And you are part of that inheritance now. You carry the silence with you, in your ears, in your thoughts, in the pit of your chest, where unease grows when truth is too heavy to deny. The curse is no longer theirs. It is yours. But here is the secret no villager ever discovered. Curses do not only consume, they initiate, and the men who survive initiation do not return the same. They return awake. And so I ask you, if you feel the silence pressing against your skin right now, if you feel the unease crawling behind your ribs, do not run from it. Stand in it, breathe it, claim it as yours, because the man who can master silence can master anything. Dudleytown has taken many, but it has also chosen a few. The ones who do not crumble, the ones who do not flee, the ones who see the curse for what it is, a weapon of fear, and instead of being consumed by it, they seize it and wield it. That choice is yours now. When you close this screen, when the silence of your own room swallows you whole, a song. Ask yourself, will you carry the curse as chains, or will you carry it as fire? Because once you hear the silence, once you see the pattern, you are never the same again. The village of the damned does not disappear. It lives on in you.